The distress signal had been broadcasting for 6 hours before the Galactic Council fleet finally arrived. At the Varith system, Fleet Admiral Sorevel stood at the command bridge of the Council warship Eternal Accord and watched the main display screen fill with data. She was a tall Drathari with pale blue skin and 4 narrow eyes that moved independently when she was thinking hard. Right now all 4 eyes were moving. The data coming in from the Varith system was not good. The colony on Varith 4 was burning. Sara could see the thermal signatures from orbit. Hundreds of structures on the surface were sending up heat plumes into the cold atmosphere. The colony had been a peaceful one, mostly Krellian farmers, and a small population of Tuvari traders. They had been there for 3 generations. They had done nothing wrong. They had simply been in the wrong part of the galaxy when the Vorai decided they wanted more border territory. Admiral said her tactical officer, a young Drathi named VTH, I am reading 14 Vorkai warships in low orbit around Varith 4. There are also 6 more positioned at the system's outer boundary. They appear to be running a blockade pattern. Sora nodded slowly. What is the status of the colony? Surface population was approximately 40,000 at last registry count. Sensors are showing heat signatures consistent with large weapons discharge. Many of the eastern settlements are no longer responding to communication pings. VTH paused. He was young and he still struggled sometimes to keep his voice flat when the news was bad. Estimated civilian casualties are high. Admiral. Sora closed her eyes for a moment, then she opened them and looked at the rest of the bridge crew. They were all watching her. They wanted to know what the plan was. She wished she had a better one to give them. The council fleet she commanded was not small. She had 11 warships, 2 heavy cruisers and a carrier loaded with fighter craft against 14 Vorkai warships in defensive orbit, plus 6 more at the system edge. Those numbers were not comfortable. Vorkai built their ships thick and mean. Their hulls were heavy. Their weapons were powerful. They did not care much about elegance or speed. They cared about hitting hard and not dying. Open a channel to the Vorai command vessel, Sora said. The communication officer at Tuvari named Priel worked at her console. For a moment. Channel is open, Admiral. Sora straightened her back and kept her voice calm and firm. Vorkai Fleet Command, this is Fleet Admiral Sorevel of the Galactic Council. You are in violation of the Varith Neutrality Accord which your government signed 40 years ago. You are ordered to cease all hostile action, withdraw from Varith 4 orbit and stand down your vessels. Any further damage to the colony or its population will be considered an act of open war against the Council. Respond. There was all violence. Then a voice came back, deep, rough, and completely unimpressed. Fleet Admiral, you have arrived with 11 warships. We have 20. Your neutrality accord is a piece of old paper. Ver is Vorkai territory now. Leave or you will be destroyed alongside the colony. The channel clicked off. Sora's jaw tightened. She had expected this, but hearing it still made something cold move through her chest. The Vorai had been pushing borders for 12 years. This was simply the latest push, and the Council, for all its committees and its votes and its very long, very formal debates, had never been good at stopping pushes like this before they became something worse. Admiral, said her censor officer, a Quiet male named Das. I am reading. Unusual energy signatures at the system's outer boundary beyond the Vorai blockade. Line. Sora frowned. Define unusual. It is. I am not sure how to define it. Admiral, the energy pattern does not match any drive signature in our database. Das tapped at his console several times as if he was convinced he was making an error and rechecking would fix it. It is very large. The energy output is far above anything our ship's proil drive, and it is moving fast, very fast. A Vorkai reinforcement. No, Admiral, the Vorkai are also tracking it. Their outer blockade ships have moved into a defensive formation. I believe they do not know what it is either. That was strange enough to make Sora step closer to the main display. She stared at the long-range sensor feed. The Vorkai outer ships, 6 heavy warships that each outmassed 2 of her own cruisers, had broken their blockade pattern and turned to face the incoming signature. That meant they were worried. The Vorkai were not easy to worry. How large is the contact? She asked. Das checked his readings again. Then he checked them a third time. When he looked up, his expression was one Sora had never seen on him before. Admiral, the object appears to be approximately 11 km in length. Nobody on the bridge spoke. Sora heard her own breathing in the silence. 11 km, the largest warship in the Galactic Council fleet was the Eternal Accord itself, and it was 900 m long. That was considered enormous. That was considered a statement of power. 11 km was not a warship. 11 km was something else entirely. 11 km was something that had no business existing. VTH, she said carefully. What is the largest vessel in the Vorkai fleet? Their command carrier, Admiral, the Unbroken Hammer. It is approximately 1.4 km in length. 1.4 km against 11. Sora stared at the display and said nothing. The energy signature was growing stronger now. The sensor feed was updating every few seconds, and each update showed the same thing, a massive object approaching the outer boundary of the Vareth system at a speed that should not have been possible for something that size. Most large vessels sacrificed speed for mass. That was simple physics. You could not have both, but this thing was doing both, and it was doing it without apparent difficulty, and the sensor officer kept checking his instruments as if he was searching for the mistake that would make this all make sense. No mistake appeared. The Vorkai outer ships are transmitting a warning signal, Priel said from the communications console. They are ordering the contact to identify itself and stop. Is the contact responding? Not yet, Admiral. The Vorai ships moved again, this time spreading into an attack formation. Sora knew that formation well. It was what the Vorkai did when they intended to fire first and ask questions after they had opened with that formation at 3 other border systems in the past decade. It usually ended with the other side in pieces. She watched the formation complete itself on the display. Then she watched the enormous contact drop out of faster than light travel. There was a flash on the long-range visual feed. Not a small flash, not the kind of flash ship made when it dropped out of FTL and the drive energy dispersed. This flash was wide and bright, and it took 3 full seconds to fade. When it faded, the main display updated, and the visual sensors finally had something to look at, rather than just energy readings. Bridge went completely silent. What hung in space at the outer boundary of the Vareth system, was not a ship in any sense that Sora understood the word. It was a structure. It was a vast, dark, angular structure that extended across the visual field in a way that made her feel small just looking at it. It was shaped something like a blade, long and narrow at the front, widening toward the back into a series of massive sections that were clearly distinct hull segments. The hull itself was dark gray, almost black, with lines of running lights across its surface that looked, from this distance, like stars on a very orderly night sky. There were weapons arrays visible even at long range, rows and rows of them arranged along the dorsal and ventral surfaces. There were what appeared to be launch bays, not one or two, but dozens arranged in columns along both sides of the main hull, and there were drive units at the rear that were still glowing from the FTL transit, each one larger than several of the Council's destroyers. Stacked together, 11 km of dark metal, floating in space, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching. Admiral VTH said, and his voice had lost all of its trained flatness. The Vorkai outer ships are arming weapons. Of course they are, Sora said quietly. She could not look away from the display. What is our own status? Our weapons are at standby, awaiting your order. She said nothing. For a moment, she was thinking about something that had occurred to her as she stared at the enormous vessel. It had not fired. The Vorai had moved into attack formation and armed weapons, and the enormous ship had not done anything. It had simply arrived. It was simply present. It seemed to be waiting. DOS, she said. Is the contact scanning us? DOS check. Yes, Admiral. Active. Scanning. Very thorough. Whatever it is, it appears to be gathering detailed information about everything in this system, including the colony and the Vorkai ships and us. He paused. Admiral, the scan is the level of detail the scan is capturing is beyond anything our own sensors can produce. Whatever instrumentation that vessel carries, it is considerably more advanced than ours. Sora absorbed that advanced sensor, enormous size, speed that defied its own mass, and no aggression. Not yet. It had arrived in a system full of warships pointed at each other, and it had simply stopped and started reading everything around it, like a scholar who had just entered a library. Pel, she said, is the contact broadcasting on any frequency? No, Admiral, it is receiving. It has received the Vorkai warning transmission, but it has not responded. What about to us? Has it directed any signal specifically toward our fleet? Priel worked at her console. No, Admiral, not yet. Sora watched the Vorkai outer ships. They were still in attack formation, still armed, but they had not fired. She wondered what was stopping them. It might have been uncertainty. It might have been the simple, very basic animal instinct that even Batley-hardened Vorai warriors apparently possessed, the instinct that said something this large and this quiet might not be something you wanted to start a fight with, or it might have been something else, something simpler. The Vorkai outer commander might just be waiting for someone to tell him what that thing was before he decided whether shooting it was a good idea. That was the question everyone in the system was asking right now. What was it? Sora turned to her tactical display and opened the Council's universal registry. Every known species in the galactic community had their vessels cataloged. Every known drive signature, every hull, configuration, every known size class. She ran the search parameters herself. 11 kilometers in length, the drive. Signature that DOS had captured the angular hole configuration from the visual feed. The registry searched. Registry returned no results. She ran it again with broader parameters. Any vessel within 50% of that length, any drive signature within 40% of the readings, any species known to possess FTL technology not currently registered. As a council member, the registry returned no results. She sat back and stared at the blank results screen, and then she looked at the enormous black shape on the visual feed, and she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt genuinely, completely. Admiral VTH said, breaking the silence. The Vorkai Outer Command ship is hailing. The contact again, direct type beam. Transmission this time. They are demanding identification under Vork military code. Is the contact responding? A pause. No, Admiral. Another pause. Admiral, the contact is moving. Sora snapped her eyes back to the display. The enormous vessel was indeed moving, not toward the Vorkai, but across the outer boundary, moving slowly and deliberately in a wide arc that was clearly taking it toward a better angle. On the Verath system, toward a better angle. On Verath 4, toward a better view of the colony, of the burning settlements, of the Vorai warships in low orbit. It was repositioning. It was choosing its own position. And something about that, the calm, unhurried way it was doing it, made Sora's 4 eyes all focus in the same direction at exactly the same moment, which almost never happened unless she was very, very worried. How long until it completes that arc? She asked. At current speed, approximately 7 minutes, Admiral. 7 minutes. In 7 minutes, that enormous ship would be positioned between the burning colony on Verath 4 and the Vorkai fleet currently orbiting it, not between Sara's fleet and the Vorhi. Between the colony and the Vorai. She stared at the display for a long moment. Then she said something she had not planned to say. I think she said quietly that it is here about the colony. Nobody argued with her. Nobody could think of anything better to say. So they all watched the display, and they watched the enormous dark vessel complete its arc. And they watched the Vorkai outer ships finally break formation and pull back. Not because anyone had ordered them to, and not because they had been threatened, but because 20 years of space combat experience apparently told every single Vorkai commander in that system the same thing at the same time. Whatever that thing was, you did not get between it and the thing it was looking at. The Vorkai outer ships pulled back to join the main fleet at Verath 4 orbit, and the enormous vessel held its new position. Sora watched the running lights move slowly across its hull in the visual feed, and she found herself wondering, not for the first time in the last 20 minutes, where it had come from, who had built it, what species had looked at the scale of this galaxy and said, "We need something bigger." She had no answers. She had a feeling that answers were coming. She had a feeling they were going to be very, very interesting. Her communication console lit up. Pell turned from her station with an expression that Sora had never seen on a Tuvari before. Wide eyes, hands slightly unsteady, voice careful and precise in the way voices got when people were trying very hard not to show how startled they were. Admiral Pell said, "The unknown vessel is broadcasting Galactic Standard clear signal directed toward all vessels in the system. Sara straightened in her command chair. "Put it on," she said. The voice that came through the bridge speakers was calm. It was even. It belonged to something that breathed air and spoke with a jaw and a tongue and vocal cords, which meant it was biological and not a machine, and it carried in it the specific quality that certain voices carried, the quality of someone who was not in a hurry because they did not need to be in a hurry, because nothing in the immediate environment constituted a threat to them. "This is Commander Park Jin-ho of the United Nations Ship of Terror," the voice said to all vessels in the Verith system. "We are aware of the situation on the surface. We are here to observe. We ask that all parties hold their current positions. We will be in contact shortly." The transmission ended. Bridge was very quiet. Sora looked at Pell. "Run that name through every database we have." Pell ran it. "No results, Admiral. No match in any known species registry. No match in any language database. The name structure is unrecognized." Sora nodded. She had expected that. She looked at the enormous dark ship on the display, the Aegis of Terrora. She did not know what that meant. She did not know what a United Nations ship was, or what Terrora referred to, or who Commander Park Jin-ho was, or what species spoke with a voice like that, steady and warm and completely entirely unafraid. She knew one thing: whatever came next, the Verith system had just become the most important place in the galaxy, and she had a feeling it was going to stay that way for a very long time. The silence after the transmission lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then everyone on the bridge of the Eternal Accord started talking at once, and Fleet Admiral Soraville had to raise her voice sharply to cut through all of it. The crew quieted down, but she could see it in their postures, the tension, the confusion, the nervous energy that came from standing in the middle of something nobody understood. She understood the feeling. She shared it, but she was the Admiral, and being the Admiral meant she did not get to show it. "VTH," she said, keeping her voice level. "Full sensor sweep on the contact. Everything we have, whole composition. Weapon count, life sign readings. Everything already running. Admiral Pell, get me a line to Council High Command. Priority channel encryption level 1. Opening the line now. Admiral Das, I want that drive signature analyzed. I want to know if it matches anything at all in any database we carry on this ship. Cross-reference against old records, pre-console records, theoretical vessel design models, everything." "Yes, Admiral." She turned back to the main display and studied the enormous vessel. It had not moved since the transmission. It sat at the outer edge of the system in its chosen position, running lights tracing slow, steady patterns across its hull. Drive units cooling to a dull glow. It looked, if such a word could be applied, to something 11 km long and covered in weapons. Patient. It looked like it was comfortable waiting. That itself was interesting. Most vessels that arrived in a disputed system with that kind of firepower did not position themselves and wait. They either moved to assert dominance immediately, or they held back at a safe distance. This vessel had done something different. It had moved to a specific position, one that placed it as a clear obstacle between the Vork fleet and the colony on Verth 4, and then it had stopped, announced itself calmly, and told everyone to hold still. It was the behavior of something that had a plan and was in no rush to execute it. The Vorkai, for their part, were doing something Sara had rarely seen. They were holding still. The 20 Vorkai warships were still in formation. Around Vareth 4 and at the outer boundary, but they had not attacked. They had not advanced. They had not sent another warning transmission. They were sitting in their positions and presumably staring at their own sensor feeds and trying to figure out what they were looking at, just like everyone else. VTH completed his initial sensor sweep and turned with his report. Admiral Hull, composition on the contact is partially readable. The outer layer appears to be a metal alloy we do not have in our materials database. The density is significantly higher than standard hull plating, roughly 3 times the density of our best armor composites. There is also what appears to be an energy field layered over the hull, not a standard shield configuration. The geometry is different, more integrated weapon count. VTH hesitated. That is where the reading becomes difficult. Admiral, I can identify what are clearly weapons placements along the dorsal and ventral hull. I count over 200 distinct installations. However, there are additional structures that I cannot classify. They may be additional weapon types we do not recognize, or they may be support systems. I cannot say with certainty. He paused again. The launch bays I can count clearly. There are 48 of them, Admiral. Each bay appears large enough to house multiple craft. 200 weapons emplacements, 48 launch bays on a single ship. Sora processed that life signs real but unusual. The life sign configuration suggests a biological crew, oxygen breathers, carbon-based biology consistent with several known species types, but the density is low. For a ship that size, I am reading approximately 6,000 life signs across the full vessel length, 6,000 on an 11 km ship. The Eternal Accord carried 800 crew across 900 m if you scaled purely by volume. Something the size of the Aegis of Terror should carry tens of thousands, unless the ship was heavily automated, unless the crew was small by design. Managing systems too advanced to need large numbers of hands. Council High Command is on the line. Admiral Pell announced. Sara moved to the encrypted communication terminal and pressed the contact point. The face that appeared on the small screen was High Counselor Dawn, an older Drather male, silver blue, with the carefully composed expression of someone who had been in political positions long enough to have mastered the art of looking calm while being anything but. Admiral Dawn said, "We are receiving your sensor data in real time. This vessel, you have no identification on it." "None, Counselor. It appears in no registry. Its drive signature is unknown. Its hull composition does not match any material in our database." The commander identified himself by name and gave the vessel a designation, Aegis of Terra. But neither the name nor the designation matches any known species or civilization. Dawn's expression did not change, but one of his eyes shifted very slightly. The involuntary tell that Drathari politicians never quite managed to eliminate. He was more rattled than he looked, and its current posture stationary, no weapons fire, no aggressive movement. It has positioned itself between the Vorai and the colony, but has taken no further action since the transmission. And the Vorkai holding position, they appear uncertain. Counselor, there was a pause. Dan looked at something off-screen and then looked back. Admiral, your current orders: stand, protect the colony, but exercise Considerable caution with respect to this unknown vessel. Do not provoke it. Do not approach it without more information and find out what it is. Yes, counselor, the line closed. Sora turned back to the bridge. DOS. Anything. From the database cross-reference, the sensor officer looked up from his work, and the expression he wore was one that Sora was going to remember for a long time. It was the expression of a careful, methodical, experienced man who had just found something that did not fit in any of the categories he had spent his career building. Admiral, I found something, but I must warn you that what I found is very old, and it is not from any official database. Show me. DOS transferred the data to her command display. It was an old record pre-console, which meant it was at least 300 years old. It came from the archive records of a minor Krellian surveyor fleet that had apparently ventured into a region of space well outside the currently mapped area. The record was fragmentary and badly preserved, but there was a description in it that had triggered DOS's cross-reference search. She read it. The Krellian surveyor had reported detecting at extreme long range what it described as a moving structure of impossible size. The surveyor had not approached it. The surveyor had recorded the sighting and then spent 3 paragraphs explaining why it had turned around and gone home. The energy signature it described was not a perfect match to what they were reading now, but it was close enough that DOS search had flagged it. At the bottom of the record was a note added by a Krellian archivist at some later date, which read, "Surveyor Captain's testimony reviewed and filed. No corroborating evidence. No follow-up expedition conducted. Classification unverified. 300 years ago. They have been out there," Sora said quietly, more to herself than to anyone, "on the bridge for at least 300 years. That would appear to be the case." Admiral DOS said, "Possibly longer. The surveyor's record is the oldest I found. But if they have been traveling beyond the mapped regions for that long, they could have been active much earlier and simply never crossed paths with anyone who filed a report or anyone who survived to file a report," Sora thought. But she kept that thought behind her teeth. The Vorkai moved, not all of them. The main fleet at Vareth 4 orbit stayed put, but the 6 ships that had originally formed the outer blockade line began moving slowly, deliberately, toward the Aegis of Terror. They were not in full attack formation. They were in a probe formation, the kind the Vorkai used when they wanted to get close enough to read a target properly before committing to a fight. Vorai. Outer ships are moving toward the contact. Bait confirmed. They appear to be conducting a close approach for sensor purposes. What is the contact doing? Nothing, Admiral. Still stationary. The 6 Vorkai ships crept forward at 300 km from the Aegis of Terra. They slowed. Sora watched their sensor emissions ramp up on the display. They were scanning, doing exactly what she had done, trying to figure out what this thing was. Then one of the Vorkai ships did something very Vorsy. It fired a ranging shot, not a full weapons discharge, just a single pulse from a forward cannon, the kind of thing the Vorkai sometimes did when they were not sure if something was a threat or a derelict. Fire a small shot and see if it responds. The pulse crossed the gap and struck the hull of the Aegis of Terra, and nothing happened. No explosion, no visible damage, no hull breach, no secondary explosion from impacted systems. The energy pulse simply stopped when it hit the hull. It did not even leave a visible mark. It was as if the ship had simply absorbed the shot and processed it the way large animal processed the sting of a small insect without apparent effect. Without apparent concern, the 6 Vork ship stopped moving. There was a very long pause in the Varith system. Then the Aegis of Terra spoke again to the Vorkai vessel that fired the ranging shot. The voice of Commander Park Jinho said that was unnecessary. We are not here for you. We are here about the colony. We suggest you rejoin your formation and wait. This will be resolved shortly. The transmission ended. One of the Vorkai ships started backing away from the Aegis of Terror. Then a second, then a third. By the end of it, all 6 of the outer ships were moving back toward the main fleet, and nobody watching them could have said they were doing it in any orderly way. They were doing it the way ships backed away when the crew decided collectively, and without a formal order that being where they were was a very bad idea. On the bridge of the Eternal Accord, someone let out a long, shaky breath. Sara did not look to see who it was. She felt she understood. Admiral Pell said, and her voice was now very careful. Aegis of Terra is hailing us directly. Type beam addressed specifically to this ship. Sara stood up very straight. On speakers, the same calm voice. Fleet Admiral Vell, this is Commander Park of the Aegis of Terror. We have reviewed the situation in this system. We understand you are here on behalf of the Galactic Council to address the Vorkai incursion. We would like to coordinate. Are you available to speak directly? Sara looked at her crew. They looked back at her. Every face showed the same question. What do we do? She had no handbook for this. There was no council protocol for an unknown vessel of impossible size asking to coordinate actions against a common threat. There was no training exercise that had covered this scenario. There was simply the situation and herself in her judgment. She pressed the open channel. Control, Commander Park, this is Admiral Saravel. We are available to speak. Before we proceed, I have to ask, who are you? Where are you from? Your vessel and your name do not appear in any registry I have access to. A brief pause, then the voice again, and now there was something in it, something very slight, almost undetectable, that might have been quiet amusement. Admiral, we are human. We are from a planet called Earth. We are aware that we are not in your registry. That is something we have been meaning to address for some time. Another slight pause. We think this situation may be a good occasion to do that. Admiral Sora sat back in her command chair and stared at the enormous dark ship on the display and tried to find a response to that. She could not immediately find one. Human, she said at last, mostly to herself, testing the word. It was not a word in any language she knew, which meant it was a translation of something from their own language. Earth, yes, Admiral, the voice said, and it was definitely patient, very, very patient. We will explain everything. We would ask, in the meantime, that the Council fleet hold its position and allow us to address the Vorai situation. We believe we can resolve it without unnecessary loss of life on any side. Sora looked at the Vorkai fleet on the display. 20 warships, a burning colony of 40,000 strong population still trapped on the surface. She looked at the Aegis of Terra. She thought about the ranging shot from the Vorkai probe ship. Shot that had done nothing. She thought about 6 Vorkai warships backing away. from a single vessel without being fired. Upon, she pressed the channel control. Again, Commander Park, the Council fleet. Will hold position, we are watching. Understood, Admiral, thank you. The channel closed. Sora sat in her chair and watched the enormous ship and thought about all the things she did not. No, she thought about the old Krellian survey record and what it meant that something this large had been operating beyond the mapped regions for at least 300 years. She thought about the word human. She thought about a planet called Earth that was not on any chart she had ever seen. She thought about 6,000 lives aboard a ship built like a world, and what kind of people built something like that, and why, after 300 years or more of watching from the darkness, they had decided today was the day to step forward. She was still thinking about all of it when the Vorkai main fleet finally made its next move, and that was when things truly began. The invitation came 20 minutes after the last transmission, a short, clean message directed to the Eternal Accord from the Aegis of Terra, signed by Commander Park Jinho, suggesting that a small delegation from the Council fleet might wish to come aboard for a direct meeting. It stated that a shuttle bay on the port side of the vessel, approximately at the midship mark, would be made available. It included approach coordinates precise enough that Soar's navigation officer could plot the course. Without any calculation, the bridge crew looked at Admiral Sorevel. She looked at the coordinates. She looked at the enormous ship. She looked at the Vorkai fleet, which was still holding position at Varith orbit and had in the last 20 minutes not fired on the colony again, which was itself something worth noting. She was not sure if the Vorkai were waiting to see what the strange vessel did, or if they were waiting for better odds, or if they were simply doing what everyone else in the system was doing, which was watching. She made a decision. She took VTH, her tactical officer in Dosses, her Spencer officer in Pell, her communications officer, and a security escort of 4 soldiers, and she ordered a shuttle prepared. She considered telling Council High Command before she went, but decided it would take too long, and the counselor would very likely tell her not to go, which was not an instruction she was prepared to follow. Right now, the shuttle left the Eternal Accord and crossed the gap between the two vessels. Sora sat in the front passenger seat and watched the Aegis of Terra grow in the shuttle viewport. At distance it had been enormous. Up close as they approached, and the scale of it resolved itself from sensors and data into something she could actually see with her own eyes. It was something else entirely. The hull was not smooth. It had texture. Deep channels and recessed sections ran along its length, and as the shuttle flew along the midship section, she could see that many of these recessed areas contained additional systems, what appeared to be secondary sensor arrays, communication dishes, and in several places what looked like repair or maintenance access points large enough to fly a mid-sized transport through. The metal itself was dark, almost black, the shadow of the ship's own bulk, but where the starlight caught it at the right angle, it had a quality to it. Faint structural pattern in the alloy, like something that had been built to last, not just for the mission it was currently on, for a very long time. The shuttle found the indicated bay. The doors were already open. 2 massive blast doors, each one larger than the Eternal Accord's entire shuttle deck, sliding apart to reveal a lit interior. The bay inside was large enough to hold 15 of the Council fleet shuttles side by side with room to spare. It was clean, well lit with a warm white light that felt deliberate, and as they descended and landed on the deck, Sora could see a small group of figures waiting, the humans she had been trying to prepare herself for this moment during the shuttle transit. She had thought about what she might see, some kind of species that had never made contact with the galactic community, possibly something very different from anything she knew. She had steeled herself for the unexpected. She had not quite expected to see something so close to familiar. There were 6 of them standing on the deck as the shuttle ramp descended. They were bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. The head was proportioned differently from Drathari, smaller, rounder, with eyes that faced forward in a way that suggested something that had, at some point in its evolutionary history, needed to judge distances well. The eyes were various colors. 2 of the figures had dark eyes, 1 had pale ones, 1 had eyes that were a shade somewhere between brown and amber. They had no scales, their skin was smooth, and it came in shades that ranged from very light to a deep warm brown. They were, compared to most Drathari, quite compact, not as tall on average, not as long-limbed, but they held themselves in a way that communicated something. It was the same way that certain commanding officers held themselves in all species. Upright, relaxed, and completely at home. The one in front was slightly taller than the others. He wore a uniform that was dark and close-fitted, with markings on the collar and sleeve that Sora guessed were rank indicators. His hair was dark and worn short. His face was calm. His eyes, when they met hers as she came down the shuttle ramp, were a steady dark brown, and they carried the same quality she had heard in his voice over the communication channel. Not aggressive, not boastful, not cautious, just present. He stepped forward and extended one hand toward her, palm open, in a gesture that felt like she searched her memory. Something like a greeting gesture used by several species she knew, meaning no weapons held, no threat intended. Admiral Vel. He said his galactic standard was perfect, better than perfect. It had a natural quality to it, as if he had been speaking it for years. I am Commander Park Jinho of the United Nations ship Aegis of Terra. Thank you for coming. She hesitated only briefly before returning the gesture, touching her fingers to his. It seemed to be what the gesture required. His grip was firm and then released. Commander Park, thank you for the invitation. She looked at him carefully. Your galactic standard is very good. We have had time to study it, he said, the slight thing in his voice. Again, the same almost amusement she had heard before. Please come with me. There is a briefing room where we can speak. I imagine you have many questions. That, she said, is a considerable understatement. He smiled. It was the first time she had seen the expression clearly enough to read it. It changed. His face made it warmer, more open. She had seen that expression on Drathari, on Krellians, on Tuvari. It appeared that whatever else humans were, they were something that smiled. She followed him through the bay door and into the interior of the Aegis of Terra. The corridors were wide, not absurdly wide, but comfortably wide enough that 6 or 7 people could walk abreast without crowding. The ceilings were high. The lighting was consistent and warm. There was signage on the walls in a script she did not recognize, presumably the human's own language, and in galactic standard below each sign. She noted that When she looked at the galactic standard translations, they were accurate. Detailed, not the kind of translation that came from a rough dictionary, but the kind that came from someone who genuinely understood the language. Crew they passed in the corridors looked at the delegation with open curiosity, but not hostility. Sora looked back. She saw the variety again, different skin shades, different sizes, some taller and some shorter, hair in different shades and lengths. They all wore the same dark uniform. They all moved with a purpose, an efficiency that she recognized as the walk of trained military personnel. But there was something else in how they moved through this ship, a comfort, a sense of belonging. They were at home here, the way that crew members were at home in a vessel they had spent years aboard. Commander Park brought them to a briefing room that was relative to rest of the ship, modestly sized. There was a long table, chairs clearly designed for the human body proportions, but with adjustable sections that had apparently been reconfigured for Drathari proportions. She could see the adjustment marks, which meant they had known who was coming, which meant they had prepared. She found a seat. Park sat across from her. The other humans, his officers, clearly took positions around the table. Sora's crew settled around. Sir, I will start with the obvious question, Sora said, because if I do not ask it first, I will not be able to focus on anything else. How long have you been in this galaxy? Park looked at his officers briefly. Something passed between them, not spoken, just a look. Then he turned back to Sora. Our species evolved on a planet called Earth in a star system we call Sol, located in the inner regions of the galaxy. We developed interstellar travel approximately 300 years ago by the local calendar. Since then we have been exploring, Sora repeated, for 300 years without making contact with any known species. We made contact with several species, Park said. Some of those contacts were not peaceful. We learned early that approaching unknown civilizations required care and time. He paused. We have been observing the galactic community for a significant portion of those 300 years. We have learned your languages, your histories, your political structures. We chose to wait until we felt we could engage in a way that was productive. Sora stared at him. You have been watching us for 300 years and you said nothing. Yes, while wars happened, while colonies were taken, while the Vorkai have spent 12 years expanding their borders. Park's expression did not flinch from that. He met her eyes steadily. We were watching, he said, and learning and building. Building what? He looked at her for a moment and then said simply this. She thought about what that word meant in this context. 300 years of building. 300 years of what those Krellian surveyors had seen from far away and decided not to approach. She thought about the sensor readings of the hull, 3 times the density of the best armor in the Council's arsenal, the 200 weapons imp placements, the 48 launch bays, the 6,000 crew managing a vessel 11 km long. And this was one ship. How many ships do you have? She asked. Park looked at her for a moment, then he said, Admiral, before I answer that, I think there are things about the current situation we should address. There is still a burning colony in this system and a Vorai fleet in orbit around it. She recognized the answer for what it was, a deliberate deferral. He was not going to answer that question yet. She filed it away and moved on. What is your intention? Regarding the Vorai, we intend to ask them to leave, Park said. Sora waited. For more did not come, that is. All that is the first part. If they comply, no further action will be needed. The colony will be assessed for relief needs, which we are prepared to assist with. Council authority over Vareth will be acknowledged and supported. He folded his hands on the table. If they do not comply, the situation will require a different approach, but I would prefer to try the conversation first, the Voorhees said. Carefully, do not generally respond well to being asked to do things they do not want to do. I am aware, Park said. I have been reading your historical records for quite some time, Admiral. Das, sitting beside Sora, leaned forward slightly and spoke for the first time since they had come aboard. He was a careful and methodical man, and he asked careful, methodical questions. Commander Park, the energy discharge from the Vorkai Probo's ship earlier, when they fired the ranging shot at your hull, you appear to sustain no damage. Park glanced at the sensor officer. Correct. Can you explain the mechanism of that resistance? Park smiled again. Not the same smile as before. This one was something different. More inward. Our hull composition and shield geometry are a function of 300 years of development. Officer Das, I will say that the shot the Vorai fired at us carried approximately the same energy output as what we would classify as a light pulse from a short-range defense weapon. It was not a significant threat to this vessel. Das sat back and absorbed that. Sora watched her sensor officer's face and saw him working through the implications of what Park had just said. The Vorkai probe ships were not small vessels. Their forward cannon pulse was not a small weapon, if that qualified as a light pulse from a short-range defense weapon by human classification standards. Then what did the Gus Terra classify as a significant threat? She was not sure. She wanted to know. Commander VTH said, the tactical officer, unable to help himself. The weapon emplacements along your hull. Can you tell me what class they are? Park looked at VTH. We use several different systems, he said. Rail-based, kinetic drivers, energy projection, weapons in several frequency ranges, missile launch systems, and some systems I am not going to describe in detail at this time. The short version, officer VTH, is that they are sufficient for our operational requirements. VTH stared at him for a moment and then sat back and said nothing. Pell spoke next, the communications officer's practical mind. Going to the practical question. Commander, you said you wished to ask the Vorkai to leave. You indicated the Galactic Council's authority in this system would be supported. Does that mean you intend to operate within the Council framework going forward? Park nodded. That is our intention. Humanity's intent is not to displace or diminish the galactic community. Our intent is to join it. He paused. As a full member, with all that implies. Sora looked at him. He looked back. She thought about all of it. 300 years. The ship she was sitting inside, the 6,000 crew, the weapons, the hull that had swallowed a cannon blast like it was nothing. She thought about the word member. She thought about what the Galactic Council would say, what the Vorai would say, what every species in the community would say when they processed the information that there had been a civilization operating in this galaxy for 3 centuries that none of them had known about. She thought about the High Counselor's carefully composed expression on her communication screen, and she thought that when she gave him her full report, that expression was going to be somewhat harder to maintain. I have one more question, she said. Park waited. Why? Now, of all the moments in 300 years. Why this system? Why this incident? Why? Today, Park was quiet for a moment. He looked at the table and then he looked up at her. When he spoke, his voice was still calm, still even, but there was something in it now that had not been there before, something quieter and more serious, because 40,000 people are on that surface, he said, and they are dying, and we are here, and we can stop it. And there is no longer any sufficient reason to wait. The briefing room was very quiet. Sara looked at him. For a long moment, she thought about the 300 years of watching. She thought about what it must have taken to watch and not act. She thought about what had finally made that constraint break. All right, she said at last, then let us go talk to the Vorkai. Commander Park Jinho Chimada. Pleb, and for the first time since she had come aboard, the patience in his bearing shifted into something more purposeful. He nodded once and they went. The transmission to the Vorka fleet went out from the Aegis of Terra. At the same moment, Sara's delegation shuttle departed the human ship to return to the Eternal Accord. Commander Park had been clear that the Council fleet should be back in formation before the communication was sent. Sara appreciated the consideration, though she was not entirely sure she understood it until she was back in her command chair and watching the events unfold on the main display. Park had explained very calmly in the briefing room what he intended to say to the Vorhi. He had not made it sound complicated. He had said, we will ask them to withdraw. We will give them a clear timeline. We will make the consequences of non-compliance plain, and we will mean everything we say. Sora had asked if he expected the Vorhi to comply. Park had thought about that for a moment. In my experience, he had said, people who have been winning for a long time need to see something very clearly before they accept that the situation has changed. We intend to show them clearly. The transmission went out. Sara read the text feed as Priel pulled it up on the bridge display because she wanted to see exactly what the human said. It was short to Vorkai Fleet Command Varith System. This is Commander Park Jinho, United Nations Ship Aegis of Terror. You are ordered to cease all hostile action against the population of Varith 4. You are ordered to withdraw your fleet from the system within 2 standard hours. The colony is under the protection of the Galactic Council and, as of this moment, the protection of humanity. Non-compliance will result in the use of force. We recommend compliance. Commander Park, UNS Aegis of Terror. That was all. No long list of grievances, no political language, no committee wording. 2 standard hours. Get out. Non-compliance means force. Sara watched the display and waited. The Vorkai response took 8 minutes. She supposed the Vorkai fleet commander had needed some time to read the transmission and decide how to respond. She could imagine the debate aboard the Vorkai command ship. She could imagine the officers looking at their own sensor feeds and looking at the Aegis of Terror and arguing about what it was and what it could actually do, and whether the ranging shot result had been an anomaly or a real demonstration of what their weapons could not do to it. She could imagine the fleet commander at the end of all of that deciding the same thing. Vorkai commanders had decided for 12 years in similar situations that the thing in front of them was an obstacle, and obstacles were there to be removed. The Vorkai fleet moved, not just the outer ships this time, all of them. 20 warships began to reposition and VTH. Read the formation change with the flat voice of a trained officer who was not allowing himself to show what he was thinking. Vorkai fleet is transitioning to full combat formation, Admiral. They are advancing on the Aegis of Terror. Weapons are going hot across all 20 vessels. Understood, Sora said. What is the Aegis doing? Still stationary. Admiral, no apparent reaction. 20 Vork warships, the largest being the carrier Unbroken Hammer at 1.44 km, forming up and advancing on a single vessel. She wanted to call Park and say something, though she was not sure what. Be careful seemed both insufficient and somewhat absurd. She settled for watching. Vorkai close to engagement range, 1,000 km, which was standard Vorkai opening fire distance. They liked their weapons. At that range, their forward batteries performed best there. She had seen what Vorkai forward batteries did at 1,000 km, and she had seen what was left of what they had done at 2, and the images had not been comfortable. The Vorkai fleet opened fire. It was not a single shot or a probe discharge this time. It was a coordinated volley from 20 warships. Time to arrive. Simultaneously, 20 forward batteries firing together, energy beams, heavy projectile rounds, missile salvos. Sora had seen this kind of combined barrage used against fortified positions that were supposed to withstand it. The positions had not withstood it. The salvos crossed the gap and arrived at the Aegis of Terror on the visual feed. For a moment there was nothing but light. The combined energy of 20 warships' forward batteries striking a single hull created a visual event, bright enough that Sora's display automatically dimmed to protect the optics. Then the light faded. The Aegis of Terror was still there. It was completely, entirely undamaged. No hull breach, no debris, no secondary explosions, no change in the running lights across its surface. The weapons had not shaken the vessel. They had not scratched the hull. They had arrived in the hull, had processed them, and there was nothing left to show for it except the fading light of dispersed energy. Nobody on the bridge of the Eternal Accord said anything. Sora watched the display and waited for 3 seconds. The Aegis of Terror did nothing. She thought about what those 3 seconds meant. She thought that maybe they were the humans deciding the moment between receiving what another species had decided to throw at you and deciding how to respond. She thought about what it felt like to be on the receiving end of 20 warships' best effort and know that it had not moved you even slightly. Then the Aegis of Terra moved. It moved fast. The speed was wrong for something its size. Something 11 km long had no business moving like that, but it did, crossing the engagement distance in a time that left the Vorhi fleet trying to track it and recalculate firing solutions while the target was already no longer where it had been. The Aegis moved laterally across the Vorka formation in a long sweeping arc, and as it moved it finally fired. Not with everything, not with the 200 weapons imp placements or whatever was in those unmarked installations. Sora watched the fire pattern on the display, and she could see even from her position, even with her own sensors, that the Aegis was being selective, precise. The energy Weapons it fired were targeted at specific locations on specific ships. Drive units, it was targeting drive units. The first shot hit the Vorkai command carrier unbroken hammer, and the carrier's port drive array went dark. Not destroyed, the ship was not destroyed. There was no explosion, there was no hull breach, just the drive array gone. Disabled, the carrier lurched sideways, no longer balanced in its own thrust. The next shot took the drives off a Vorkai heavy cruiser, then another cruiser, then 4 of the escort ships, in rapid succession, so fast that the targeting had to be partially automated. No single human gunner could have acquired 4 solutions that quickly. In under 20 seconds, 7 Vorkai ships were dead in space, not destroyed, not lost, just stopped, engines gone, still intact, still with living crews inside, still completely capable of everything except moving and running away. Sara stared at the display. VTH, she said carefully. Is the Aegis targeting? Weapon systems, sensors, life support? No, Admiral, VTH said, and his voice was doing something she had never heard it do before, was quieter and slower, as if he was choosing every word with deliberate care. Exclusively drive and propulsion systems on every ship it has hit so far. No crew casualties detectable, no weapons destruction, no sensor damage, no structural damage to hull. It is disabling them, Sara said. Yes, Admiral, specifically it is making them unable to leave and unable to maneuver. She sat with that for a moment. The Aegis had taken the full combined barrage of 20 warships and then gone into the Vorkai formation and started methodically removing their ability to go anywhere. It was not trying to destroy the fleet, it was trying to ground it, and in the process of doing that, it was demonstrating very clearly, very calmly, that it could have done the other thing at any point and chose not to. The 13 remaining mobile Vorkai ships were reacting now. Some were trying to maneuver away, some were trying to form a defensive cluster. 2 of them were still firing, though their shots at the Aegis were about as effective as the first barrage had been, which was not effective at all. The Aegis moved through the formation like something that knew exactly where every threat was and where every threat was not, and it fired when it needed to fire and repositioned when it needed to reposition, and it did not appear to be in any hurry. Then Sara's display lit up with new contacts, not Vore, not Council Fleet, new contacts, multiple contacts dropping out of FTL at the outer edge of the Vareth system in rapid succession. The same signature as the Aegis, the same massive energy bloom, the same drive profile, the same impossible scale. She watched the contacts resolve one by one as her sensors struggled to process them all. Admiral Das said, and his voice was very, very careful. Now I am reading additional human vessels entering the system. I count 369. I count 12 additional contacts, Admiral. Size class, she said. Variable. Das said the smallest appear to be approximately 3 to 4 km in length. There are 3 vessels in the 6 to 7 km range, and 2 contacts that are larger than the Aegis. Admiral, sensor readings suggest they are in the 14 to 15 km range, 14 to 15 km larger than the Aegis. Sara looked at her display and saw 12 enormous human warships arranging themselves across the outer boundary of the Vareth system. They did not advance on the battle in progress. They held position in a wide formation that effectively sealed the system exits. If anything in this system tried to leave at FTL, it would have to go through the human formation to do it. They were not joining the fight, they were making sure nobody left, and Sora understood something in that moment with a clarity that was almost physically uncomfortable. The humans had not needed 12 ships to handle the Vorkai fleet. Aegis of Terra had been demonstrating that for the last several minutes all on its own, the ships were not here because the Aegis needed help. They were here because this was the humans' announcement. This was them saying clearly and without any ambiguity whatsoever that they were present, they were organized, they were here in numbers, and what the galaxy was seeing right now was not an exception. This was not one ship that had decided to act. This was a fleet that had decided to step forward back in the main engagement. The Vorkai fleet was down to 9 mobile ships, then 6, then 4. The Aegis worked through them methodically, drives gone, propulsion dead, ships drifting. The Vorkai were still firing. It seemed they did not know how to stop or could not bring themselves to stop, but their shots were doing exactly what all the previous shots had done, which was nothing. The last mobile Vorkai ship tried to run. It turned and pushed its drives to maximum and headed for the system edge at full speed. The Aegis did not chase it. It did not need to. One of the ships at the outer boundary, one of the smaller 3 to 4 km vessels, moved to intercept, match the fleeing warship speed. Without apparent effort, positioned itself directly in the Vorkai ship's path and simply waited. The Vorkai ship had 2 options. It could fire on the human vessel, blocking its escape, which it did and which had no effect, or it could stop after 3 seconds of trying the first option and achieving nothing. It stopped. Sora watched the entire Vorkai fleet sitting dead or still in the Vera system, 20 warships going nowhere, and she thought about the old political debates she had sat through in council chambers, the long arguments about whether to send 2 ships or 3 to the Vorkai border incidents, whether to file a formal complaint or an informal one, whether a committee review should precede action or follow it. She thought about how many colonies might have been different if at any point in the last 12 years someone had shown up and simply systematically and without malice or destruction removed the Vorkai's ability to go anywhere. The Aegis of Terror came to rest in the center of the drifting Vorkai fleet. It was surrounded on all sides by warships that had fired everything they had at it, and none of it had mattered, and now they were all sitting still. Park's voice came over the general channel again. Vorkai Fleet Command, your ships are immobilized. No crew members have been harmed. We have no intention of destroying your vessels or harming your personnel. However, you are currently unable to leave the system until we choose to allow it. A pause. We are going to send a transport to the surface of Verith for now to begin relief operations for the colony. During that time, we ask that you sit quietly and think about the conversation we are going to have when relief operations are complete. That conversation will involve your withdrawal from all territories taken in the past 12 years, reparations to damaged colonies, and a formal agreement regarding future border conduct. Another pause. Shorter this time. We are not asking you to surrender. We are asking you to negotiate. There is a difference. We think given the current situation, you may find negotiation more comfortable. Then the alternative, the Vorkai fleet. Said nothing, Sara's communication console lit up. It was Park on the direct channel to the Eternal Accord. Admiral Vel, we are beginning surface operations on Vareth 4. We have medical personnel and supply capabilities. Aboard, we would be grateful if the Council fleet could coordinate with us. On relief distribution, Sara looked at her bridge crew. They were all staring at her. She read in their faces every emotion she was feeling herself. The shock, the recalibration, the attempt to process the last 40 minutes and put it into a framework that made sense. There was no framework. Something entirely new had just happened, and the old frameworks were not built to contain it. Commander Park, she said into the channel. She kept her voice steady. She was the Admiral, and being the Admiral meant certain things. We will coordinate on relief operations. We have medical teams available. Thank you, Admiral. Commander, she paused. The ships at the system boundary, those are all human vessels. A brief pause. Yes, and there are more beyond what is here. It was not quite a question, but Park answered it like one. Yes, Admiral, he said. There are more. She stared at the delay. 13 human warships in the Varath system, 20 immobilized Vorkai warships going nowhere, a burning colony on the surface waiting for help that was now finally coming, and somewhere beyond the edge of the mapped region, more human ships. She exhaled slowly and then straightened in her chair. Begin relief coordination, she told her crew. All departments stand down from combat, alert and prepared to assist surface operations. They moved. They were good people, her crew, and they moved. Kept her eyes on the display for one more moment, on the enormous dark shape of the Aegis of Terra, holding the center of the system like it had always been there, like it intended to stay. She thought about the galaxy she had known yesterday, the maps and the borders and the carefully maintained ledger of who had what and who wanted what. Then she thought about the galaxy she was sitting in right now. They were not the same galaxy. She was not sure they would ever be the same galaxy again. The relief operations on Vareth 4 took 31 hours. In that time, Soravel did not sleep. She was not sure any of her bridge crew slept either. They rotated through their stations and they coordinated with the human medical teams. And they watched the enormous vessels sitting in the center of the system. And they thought their own thoughts, and when they looked at each other, they shared the particular expression of people who had witnessed something that had permanently reorganized their understanding of the world. The human medical teams were thorough. That was the word Sara kept coming back to. Thorough. They arrived on the surface in transports that descended from the EGS's launch bays in groups of 4 and 6. And they brought with them not just medical personnel but supplies. Enough supplies that Sora's logistics officer, a careful Drathari named Hess, spent an entire hour cataloging what was being offloaded, and then came to Sara with the catalog and said, with great precision, Admiral, they brought enough medical material for a population approximately 3 times the size of this colony. They appeared to have prepared for this in advance. Sara had looked at the catalog and said, yes, I believe they did, which meant they had known about the Vareth situation before arriving, which meant they had been monitoring closely enough to know not just that it was happening but how bad it was, which meant the timeline of the Aegis of Terra's arrival was not coincidence. They had come specifically, deliberately, because they had decided this was the moment and this was the place. 31 hours. The injured were stabilized, the fires were out, the eastern settlements, the ones that had gone dark on the sensor feed, had been reached on the ground, and the human teams reported back steadily to the coordination channel that Sora's communication, SIN's officer, had established between the fleets. The reports used numbers and medical terminology and logistics data, but underneath all of it was the same clear story. People who had been dying were now being kept alive, and people who had been afraid were now being helped, and the colony of Vareth 4 was going to survive this. On the second morning, the negotiations with the Vorai began. Sora was present for them, seated at a table inside a large conference space on the Ega's ease of terror that could not have been there before the delegation's first visit. It had been configured specifically, she suspected, with the right furniture for several different species and space enough for a significant number of representatives. The Vorkai fleet commander came in person. He was large, as Vorkai tended to be, a deep gray-green, heavily built, with a kind of physical presence that came from a life spent in military command. He sat down across from Commander Park and looked at him with a flat, assessing gaze of someone trying to read an opponent. Park looked back at him with the same quiet patience he had shown in every interaction Sora had witnessed so far. The Vorkai commander's name was Gra. He had been in the Vorkai military for 37 years. He had commanded 3 border operations, and this was his 4th. He did not speak. Immediately, he looked at Park. He looked at Sora. He looked at the table. Then he looked at his own hands as if consulting something, and then he looked back at Park. "What do you want?" he said. "Withdrawal from all territories taken in the last 12 years, Park said. His voice was the same as it had been in every other conversation, even clear, without heat or triumph. Full withdrawal, not partial, not phased over a decade. Completed within 60 days. Standard mapping and census teams from the Council will verify compliance," Gross said. "Nothing, reparations to the affected colonies," Park continued. "The Council will establish the figure. It will be paid. The Vorai government will be given a reasonable timeline." Grator still said nothing, and a formal binding agreement on border conduct going forward with verification mechanisms with meaningful consequences for violations. Park paused. "Consequences that will involve us." The room was quiet. Gra looked at the table again. He looked like a man doing a calculation. Man who had always been very good at the kind of calculation that involved warships and firepower and fleet numbers, and who could take what from whom, and who was now finding that the calculation had a new variable in it that changed every answer he reached. His ships were outside, sitting still in space, their drives gone. His crews were unharmed. His vessels were intact. The humans had done all of that without killing a single Vorkai soldier, and standing just outside the mapped borders of the galactic community were more human ships. How many more? Nobody at this table knew, except the calm man sitting across from him. "You were asking me to sign away 12 years of territorial expansion," Gra said. His voice was low and not exactly angry, more the voice of someone working through an unwelcome reality. "Yes," Park said, "on behalf of the Vorai government, which I do not represent at this table. You are the senior Vori officer present in this system, the agreement you sign here will be transmitted to your government with a recommendation that it be honored. The alternative is that we transmit the sensor logs from this engagement to every government in the galactic community and begin a formal discussion with the Council about border protection measures which will involve us. Park's voice was still patient. We would prefer not to do that. We would prefer to give your government the opportunity to make this choice independently. Another silence. Gra looked at him for a long time. You could have destroyed my fleet, he said at last. It was not a complaint. It was a statement of fact that was clearly the thing he had been sitting with since the engagement ended. Yes, Park said, but you did not know. Why not? Park thought about the question for a moment. When he answered, his voice was the same, but there was something in it that had not been there in the earlier responses. Something that was not quite heavy and not quite tired, but was somewhere in that territory, the voice of someone who had thought about this question many times before answering it. Because the goal is not to destroy, he said. Goal is to stop the harm. Those are different things. You were not here because your soldiers are evil. You were here because your government has been moving borders and nobody has stopped it. We stopped it. You do not need to be destroyed for that to be true. Gra was quiet for a long time after that. Then he signed the agreement. He signed it with a Vori marker on a physical document that Park's people had printed specifically for the purpose. And when he finished signing, he sat back and looked at the document and looked at Park and said nothing else. He looked like a man who had just watched the map he had lived by his entire career be replaced by a different map, and who had not yet decided how he felt about living by the new one. Sara understood the feeling. The Vori fleet was released in groups over the following 6 hours. Park's engineers, or whatever they were called, the technicians who had handled the drive disabling, had apparently been preparing repair components for the Vori drives during the negotiations, which was either a very practical gesture or a very deliberate one, and Sara suspected it was both. The Vorkai ships departed the Vareth system one by one, their drives restored, their crews intact, their vessels undamaged, except for the specific drive components that had been removed and then repaired. Vorkai fleet commander, departing last on the Unbroken Hammer, sent a single final transmission to the Eagles of Terror. It said, noted. Sora thought that was probably the most honest thing the Vorkai had said in the entire encounter. After the last Vorkai ship was gone, she returned to the Aegis of Terror one more time, not for a crisis meeting, not for a negotiation. Park had asked her to come in a message that was short and without ceremony, and she had come because she was genuinely deeply curious, and because she had a feeling this conversation was the one that mattered most. They sat in the same briefing room as before, but this time it was just the two of them, no delegations, no officers flanking them at the table. Park poured something hot into 2 small containers from a dispenser on the wall and set one in front of her. She looked at it. Tea, he said specifically, an oolong variety. It is a human drink. It may not suit your palate, but it is what I have, and I am offering what I have. She tried it. It was unusual. She would not have been able to say whether she liked it or not. She tried it a second time. The council, she said, setting the container down, is going to need to meet with you. Yes, he said. High Counselor Dan will want a full briefing. The other council members will have questions, many questions. The presence of an unknown civilization of your capabilities is going to cause significant. She searched for the right word. Discussion. I imagine so. Park said. I need to be honest with you, Commander. There will be fear. Not everyone will respond the way I have responded. There are species in the council who will see your fleet and see a threat regardless of what you intend. I know, he said. He held his tea with both hands in the way she had noticed humans did, as if the warmth of the container was something they were seeking. We expected that. It is part of why we waited as long as we did. We wanted to have something to offer, not just capability. We wanted to have record actions that demonstrate intent. Today was the demonstration, she said. Today was the beginning of the demonstration, he said. She looked at him. How many ships, Commander? You deferred the answer before. He looked at his tea, then he looked up at her. Admiral, I am going to answer that question honestly because you have been honest with me and because the Council needs accurate information to make good decisions. He set the container down. The Titan-class vessels, ships in the size range of the Aegis and larger. The Council has already seen 13. There are more. She waited. There are 47 Titan-class vessels currently commissioned, he said. There are also support fleets, carrier groups, rapid response squadrons, logistical vessels, the full count of commissioned human warships across all size classes is in the thousands. She sat with that. Thousands. Not hundreds, not dozens, thousands. With 47 ships in the size range she had watched absorb 20 warships combined fire without effect, built over 300 years of quiet preparation while the galactic community ran its committees and its debates and its careful political balancing and thought it was the full picture of what the galaxy contained. You were never going to be threatened, she said quietly. Any time in the last 300 years, no species in the community could have threatened you. There are always threats, Park said. Some of them are not other civilizations. He paused. Some of the things we encountered beyond the mapped regions in the early years of exploration were more dangerous than anything in the galactic community. That is part of why we built what we built. Not because we were afraid of you. She thought about what that meant, about what was beyond the mapped regions. About 300 years of human ships moving through the dark outside the known galaxy, encountering things that had required 47 Titan-class vessels as the eventual answer. She found she did not want to ask about that today. There was enough to process already. I will present your request for council membership, she said. I will give a full briefing to High Counselor Dawn. I will recommend that the council receive your delegation and process the application. She looked at him. I cannot predict the outcome. The council is complicated. All governing bodies are complicated, Park said. He almost smiled. We have been watching your council for a long time, Admiral. We are prepared for complicated. She stood up. He stood up. She looked at him across the table. This calm, patient man with dark eyes and a voice that had spoken to 20 armed warships and a panicking Vorai fleet commander and a galactic council admiral, with the same unhurried, steady certainty, as if the outcome had never been in serious question. She extended her hand. He took it. Welcome, she said, to the galactic community, Commander. Officially from someone who was present. Something in his expression shifted. Something small and genuine without the practice control she had been seeing since the first moment of the briefing room. For just a moment he looked not like a commander, but like a person who had waited a very long time for something and had finally reached it. "Thank you, Admiral," he said. She left the eagles of terror for the second time and crossed the gap back to the Eternal Accord in the shuttle, and she sat in the front passenger seat and looked out the viewport at the stars, and she thought about the report she was going to have to write. She thought about what you put in a report when the most significant first contact event in the history of the galactic community had just happened in a system most council members could not have placed on a map. She thought about High Counselor Dawn. Reading it, she thought about every star she could see, and the knowledge now settled permanently into her understanding of things that somewhere out there in the dark beyond the maps, those stars were not empty. They had never been empty. There had been ships out there, thousands of ships for 300 years, and none of them had known. The shuttle docked. She walked onto the Eternal Accord. Her bridge crew was there, all of them, even the ones who were technically off shift and should have been sleeping. They were standing near their stations or sitting at consoles they did not need to be at, and they were watching the display screens, showing the Vareth system, showing the eagles of Terra, showing the distant shapes of the other 12 human ships at the system boundary. They looked at her. When she walked in, she looked back at them. "Get me a line to Council High Command," she said. "Priority 1, I need to speak with the counselor." She moved to her command chair and sat down, and someone sent a message to Commander Park. "Tell him we will be in touch regarding the formal council introduction proceedings." Her communication officer opened the priority line. Her crew moved at their stations outside the viewport of the Eternal Accord. The Aegis of Terra sat still in the Vareth system, running lights moving slowly across 11 km of dark hull in the starlight, patient, present, waiting for the galaxy to catch up. When High Counselor Dawn's face appeared on the communication screen, still composed, still silver blue, still wearing that carefully neutral expression, Saravel looked at him and thought of exactly the right way to begin. She said, "Counselor, I need you to open a new file in the council registry. The name of the entry will be Humanity, and I need you to clear your calendar for the next several days. What I have to tell you is going to take some time." The High Counselor's carefully composed expression shifted, just slightly, just enough. Sora allowed herself for one brief moment the smallest version of something that might have been a smile. Then she began her report, and in the Varath system 300 years of silence finally came to a proper